thank you all for joining us this morning, this evening, I guess, mid-afternoon. We will now call the meeting of the Citizens Redistricting Advisory Committee meeting on October 21st, 2021 to order at 4:03 p.m. Joining me today in person are our committee members, Josh Caballero, Benjamin Gomez, Chrisarla Houston, Curtis Cleveland, Tony Herbert, Isabel Lozano, Elaine Botello, Connie Nichols. And joining us virtually, we will have Jana Hickson and Pat Atkins.
Just a correction, Jana Hickson has not made it on virtually just yet, but we'll let you know when she's arrived.
Okay, thank you. All right, and also here today is our consultant and expert in all things redistricting, Professor Morrison. Thank you all. Thank you so much for joining us today. We look forward to your presentation, and we're happy to serve. Thank you all very much for being here. We so appreciate it. Also here are our city staff, Jennifer Ritchie, our city attorney, Mandy Spikes, our assistant city secretary, and it may be Bradley Ford, our city manager, and Deidre Emerson, our deputy city manager, at some point in the program as well, possibly.
And Janet is around.
Okay, perfect. So can they hear me? They can hear me now, right? Are we going to have them on the screen? I'm sorry. Okay, if that's possible, that would be great. Perfect. Hi, Pat. Thanks for joining us. All right, and let's see, we've got Jan at the bottom. Okay, perfect. All right, so we will provide an opportunity for anyone in the public to address the committee. So this is kind of standard for any of the meetings we have going forward. The speakers will be allotted 1 3-minute presentation, regardless of the number of agenda items the speaker wishes to address. If they're here to speak and have not filled out a registration card, we would ask that they please see the staff at our registration table. And if they were to have handouts, they would definitely provide those to us at the beginning of their presentation and would be distributed by the committee, distributed to the committee by staff. So I think today we don't have any guests with us. And so we can kind of go through this. Okay, so Jennifer, do we need to go through all of the, as far as just kind of public discourse, that we're good? Okay, perfect. All right. So we have no speakers, as I mentioned, so we will really jump right into our presentation and our discussion of the redistricting process. I think you've all been provided the PowerPoint presentation for our kind of orientation meeting today. And so I will turn it over to Professor Morrison.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Professor and former mayor.
Yes, and former mayor.
Yeah, former mayor. It still rains on my car. All right. Okay. Well, first of all, thank you all for agreeing to serve. I'll try to make this no more painful than is absolutely necessary. Pat has sat through this before with the school district 10 years ago. Pat, not much has changed except the numbers. So thank you. And Jana, thank you for signing on. It'll take me 15 or 20 minutes probably to go through this. I'm not going to just read slide after slide. I'll be talking with you and I will cover what's on the slides. Just a heads up, we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about why and how we go about balancing population. We're going to talk a little bit about the Voting Rights Act and the additional requirements it places upon balancing population. We'll look at the existing lines, which you have a map in front of you on, and the 2020 census. And then we'll look at the draft plan I submitted to the City Council for its review, which, as I told the council, didn't even rise to the level of a suggestion. It was just a way to begin a discussion. And it makes relatively few changes. Unless I'm instructed otherwise by a client, I make no more changes than are absolutely necessary to balance population, and try to present the client with a plan that satisfies the legal requirements, but which may or may not be responsive to the needs of the city or the county or the school district. So there was really no magic to that plan. Then there have been some discussion within the council, and there have been some agreements on how that plan might be changed to be more workable for the city. and for the people that each of the council members represents. And then finally, we've got a couple of areas that are unsettled at this point, and we'll look at those. So that's sort of the overview of what we're going to be doing. So if you wouldn't mind, Andy, would you go to the next slide? Pat's in the way, of course, as usual. This, you should have this. This is simply what we have set up for potential meetings. As much as you're going to enjoy this, I'm guessing you don't want to come to any more of these meetings that are necessary to fulfill the task. What we've tried to do is space the meetings far enough apart where, in addition to attending this type of meeting, you can perform the function that I think is most valuable, and that is talking to people in the areas you represent. You've been chosen by your council members as people that the residents in those districts know and trust. And so to the extent that you can get public opinion and help the council guide the process, and it's a council process. My job's not to draw lines per se. I draw lines to get the council started. My job is to get the council as close as the law allows to the set of lines that it thinks best serve the city. So let's go ahead. Oh, thank you. Bye, Pat. Everybody's seen that. You probably have already gotten a copy from Mindy or from let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, rules of redistricting. Fairly straightforward. Balanced population within tolerances that are acceptable. And to do that, the first thing we have to do is overlay the 2020 census count on the existing lines, and you'll see that in a moment. The prime directive, if you will, the principal goal of redistricting is to balance population. If we were dealing with the congressional plan at the state level, under the congressional plan, they have to balance population to a de minimis level, which means to the extent that you can remove any differential among the then 36, now 38 congressional seats, you have to. So when we got 3 additional congressional seats and went from 33 to 36, divide state of Texas by 36, that gives you an ideal number of people for each district. Now, number of people is important. We call this, we used to call it one man, one vote. That was perfectly accurate, except it had nothing to do with men and it had nothing to do with voters. So like so many things, we changed it to one person, one vote, but it still has nothing to do with voters. Your council members represent you and the other people in your council district. They don't have to be voters. They don't have to be eligible voters. They don't have to be of voting age. Everybody is entitled to equal representation. And if you have too many people in a council district, maybe counterintuitively, but we call that underrepresentation because more people are sharing less of a vote on the council. If you have too few people, those people are overrepresented. So if you looked at what the state did 10 years ago, actually 9 years ago on the congressional, if you took the congressional district with the greatest population and that with the least number of people, the differential was less than one person. And it was less than one person because the law requires de minimis variance. And with our computers nowadays, at least when we're dealing with the census count, and I'll come back to that in a moment, we can get it down to less than one person, and you have to have a reason why you didn't. Now for cities, counties, school districts, state house, state senate, state board of education, we're not required to get down to a de minimis level. We've been given some tolerance. If we had to balance population precisely in order to have a lawful plan, some ornery son of a gun would move the next day, so we'd have to start over. We also used the most recent census. Now, there's a reason, I think, that every 10 years, the census is taken on the same calendar day. Anybody remember the day that was on your census form? It was April Fool's Day. It's always April 1st. We know it wasn't accurate, particularly in a state like Texas, the day it was taken. And 15 months later, even if it was accurate, we know it no longer is. But it's kind of the only ballgame in town. So we use those numbers. If this had been done back in February of this year, before the census, or last year before the census had been taken, or back in July of this year before the census was released, we would have used the 2010 census, because that's the most reliable set of numbers that we have. But we know Waco was probably undercounted. Probably each of the districts you live in was undercounted. The biggest undercounts take place in urban areas like Houston, Dallas, Fort Worth, San Antonio, El Paso. And the biggest undercount within those almost always takes place in a minority district, in a minority area, because those sometimes are the hardest for enumerators to get into or to choose to go into to finish the count. What we don't know, for example, last time we estimated that Houston alone was undercounted by a couple 100,000 people, Harris County. But you can't use that in redistricting because we can't put them on the ground. We don't know where those people would have been had they been counted. So we are stuck with the census. Okay, yes, thank you. The requirement to balance population in a city council didn't exist until 1969. In 1969, Lyndon Olson Sr., Lynn Olson Jr.'s dad, represented the mayor of Midland, Hank Avery. And Hank Avery was sore because the Midland County Commissioners Court had divided the county into, like McLennan County, like all 254 counties in Texas, you get 4 county commissioners, each elected at large from, in a single member district, right? And a county judge. Midland had almost 68,000 people, and they made Midland 1 commissioner precinct. So when the time came to elect the commissioners court, Midland had enough votes to elect the county judge, because the county judge was elected at large and could elect its county commissioner. The other fewer than 2,000 residents of Midland elected the other 3. And when the time came to say, well, do we enter into an interlocal agreement with the city? Do we spend money near the city or not near the city? The votes would always be 3-2. And Hank Avery took that to the United States Supreme Court with Lynn Olson. And you can see the language of the court at the top. And essentially in the red lettering, what that says is our city council members have a greater direct impact on my life and your life than Congressman Sessions does. And if there's any place that you ought to have adequate representation, equal representation, it ought to be in the city council, the school district, the commissioner's court. And so beginning in '69, that applied to us. And when you think about Avery versus Midland County, you can see the mischief that would exist if we didn't do that. Thank you. Pretty much talked about this. What I haven't said yet is how close to equal do you have to get? And there's a little more art than science to this. That's not truly a safe haven, but any maximum deviation below 10% is generally considered okay. Anything above 10% is presumptively unconstitutional as a violation of equal protection. You can go above 10% if there's some reason you couldn't get it below. For example, in states like California, you may have a mountain range running down the middle of the county. And it doesn't make sense to make 2,000 people go over the mountain to vote and put them in that commissioner district in California. And so this one may be 2,000 low and that one may be 2,000 high, and it puts you over 10%. That's fine. We're pretty flat in McLennan County, and we're pretty flat in the city of Waco. We got hills now and then. I mean, you know, we've got hills. You just got to look close. We don't have any real justification for not getting below 10%. And you'll see in a moment, one of the plans I'm going to show you is about 6%. Well, could we get it to 4%? Probably, and we'll talk about that. But once you're below 7%, 8%, you're pretty safe. And sometimes to go lower than that, you make the plan worse. And I'll explain why in a moment. And you don't get a ribbon for going to 4 instead of 6. You get in trouble not going to 9 from 11, but 4 to 6, not as big a deal. All right, this is the 2020 census applied to the existing lines. And the first thing I want to point out is if you look at the yellow box on the top left, if you take the city population and divide it by the 5 council districts, if it were perfect, each council district would have 27,960 and 2/3 people. So 961 people, okay? If you go down to the next one below that, you see the 2020 census says Waco has 138,486. But when you count in the annexations we've had that didn't get reflected by the census, our actual count using census numbers is 139,803. Now, by using 139,803, I'm not abandoning the census. I'm using the census's own numbers, reflecting a more accurate map of the city of Waco. If time permits, when we get to the last 2 slides, you'll see we've got some annexations. We've got some split census blocks where when we get to the end of this process, we're going to have to do some counting, but there are not enough people involved in those to affect the level of differential we're going to have in our districts. So if there's time, we'll look at that. If not, you can see it and feel free to ask me a question. But if you look at, I'm sorry, would you go back for just a moment? Maximum variation needs to be below 10%. It's 26.14%. Now, the way you figure that is you take the ideal district, you take the variance in population between the most and the least populated council districts, which in this case is 7,309. If you express 7,309 as a percent of the ideal, that gives you the deviation from the ideal. Needs to be below 10%. We're at 26.14%. So the first thing we know is we have to redistrict. If we don't, somebody could come in and file a lawsuit. They would win that lawsuit on the pleadings. And at that point, they would be paid while the city hired someone to do the redistricting while they watched. So, okay. The other thing I want to point out, and we'll come back to, if you want to know the variance and deviation on the far right, you can see, for example, District 1 was almost 2,000 people below the ideal. District 2, about 1,600 people below the ideal. District 4, almost, well, a little over 3,500 people below the ideal. Now, those of you on here know what 1, 2, and 4 have in common. Okay. This becomes an issue because I drew these lines 10 years ago. People who knew what they were doing drew them the 10 years before that, and 10 years before that, back when I was on the council. The areas that had a significant minority concentration that could be pulled together were. And what's happened since then, of course, is what we always hoped would happen and continue to happen. And that is East Waco is no longer mostly African-American, as not to the extent it was. South Waco is not to the extent it was Hispanic origin. That has become more diverse. So as we have to add 2,000 and 3,000 and 3,500 people to those districts, it becomes difficult to pull that many people in without lowering the minority profile. And so one of the things we'll look at before we're done is if you look at the far right column on total minority, you can see that District 4 has the highest minority profile in the city of Waco. And this is the first census where that's been the case. District 4 for decades, as Tony will remember, has been sort of the microcosm of the city of Waco. If you looked at the city of Waco as a whole, and if you looked at District 4, the profiles would be pretty much the same. And that's continuing. The other thing that we've seen since the 1970 census is while
The city as a whole is 42, a little over 42% white, and District 4 is now 21.71. So we no longer really reflect.
no, that's right. From 70 on, you've gotten past that, actually.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, if you look at the districts, yeah, good point. Thank you, Tony. She did that to me when we were on the council together, too.
No problem.
Thank you. That's absolutely right. And one of the things that's happened is since 1970 census, all race and ethnicities have grown by actual numbers. But as percentages of the whole, only the people the residents who have responded to the census as being of Hispanic origin have grown as a percentage. And from 70 to 80, 80 to 90, 90 to 2000, each 10 years, that just about doubled. And in the last 20 years, it's, you can't keep doubling, but it has continued both statewide and countywide and in the city, that on a relative sense, the only group that has continued to grow percentage-wise has been our residents of Hispanic origin. Okay, thank you. Oh, yeah.
Can you tell me what that Board of Estimates number is down in the corner?
This is something that the Second Circuit has done that I say we, David Gwynn and I did this for 40 years, and David retired from teaching a little bit before I did, and retired from redistricting before this go around. Board of Estimates versus Morris is a case in through the Second Circuit, which said, if you have single member districts and at-large seats where everybody gets to vote for more than one, in this case, council member, so everybody here gets to vote for someone in their district and everybody here gets to vote for the mayor elected at large, you can compute the at-large seat in with the single member district seats. And under the formula, you then divide by 6 instead of 5 to look at your maximum deviation and average deviation. And so Board of Estimates versus Norris takes 26.14, drops it to 21.78. The only time that really matters is if your maximum deviation is above 10 and you've done the best you think you can, but the Board of Estimates is below 10. There have been times we've relied on that because in the past, the Department of Justice accepted that argument. The Supreme Court's never gone into that. The Fifth Circuit hasn't bought into that. And so I have that here, but I don't intend for us to rely on it because we don't need to here. Oh, thank you. Yeah, please. All right. Now, is that? Okay. In addition to balancing population, there are other, equal protection requires to balance population. It also requires not to discriminate people on the basis of race, for example. And so when you look at the 5th, the 14th, the 15th Amendments, one of the things you see is in the 15th Amendment, the last of if you will, the Civil War amendments, the right to vote and being given equal opportunity to vote was included in the Constitution for the first time. And you'll see on Section 2 of that, Congress was given the legislative authority to enforce it by statute, which Congress did 100 years later. Finally got around to it. And in 1965, Congress passed the Voting Rights Act. And one of the biggest parts of the Voting Rights Act came from Section 4 and 5, which dealt with retrogression and required some southern states and some counties in California to seek pre-clearance before they could make a change affecting voting. And by pre-clearance, it meant that if you came up with a change, you had to either get the voting rights section of the Civil Rights Division 60 days that they could examine it and determine it wasn't retrogressive or didn't dilute minority strength, or you could go to the District of Columbia's district court and get a declaratory judgment saying the same thing. The reason for that was the southern states in particular had sort of a whack-a-mole approach. So a state maybe, let's say our hypothetical state imposes a literacy test. And the literacy test was designed to impair minority access to the process. And somebody goes to court and they get a federal court and the federal court strikes the literacy test. So it's no longer lawful to use it. Well, before the ink's dried on that judgment, they've come up with a grandfather clause, or they've come up with a poll tax, or they've come up with some other discriminatory device to inhibit voting by, in most cases, African Americans. Under the Voting Rights Act, it was a criminal act and it made you personally liable if you implemented a change prior to giving the federal government an opportunity to pre-clear it. And that was designed to get past this whack-a-mole thing. Because if you implemented that change and we never had a chance in Washington to look at it, you'd just committed a criminal act. This pre-clearance or mother may I requirement, hey Linda, pre-clearance or mother may I requirement didn't apply to Texas in 1965. Didn't apply to us in 1975 because in 1965, Texas no longer used any of the triggering of devices to discourage voting. In the 1975 amendments, Texas got caught and put under the preclearance requirement. And what caught us was the use of an English language only ballot with over a 5% single language minority, Spanish speaking. And that was made retroactive to the presidential election of 1972. So from the presidential election in November of 1972 until about 6 years ago, any change affecting voting had to go through Washington before it could be lawfully implemented. And that could have been as simple as moving a polling place. You know, one of the great devices in the past, and I think we're seeing a little of it again today, is a week before the election, moving a polling place and not really putting word out. That's the sort of thing that's unlawful. Now, it's still unlawful, but we're back to whack-a-mole, if you will. And you're seeing that play out in the courts and in Congress right now with voting rights legislation that has sort of hit a brick wall. So it wouldn't surprise me if the next time you're sitting here with somebody else standing up here, we're back into preclearance. Because all the Supreme Court said was preclearance made sense when you implemented it in 65 and 75. You need to prove it still makes sense before you can impose that sort of obligation on the states. And no one has done that yet, at least not to the Supreme Court. All right. And then in 1982, the Supreme Court added an effects test to the voting rights. I mean, well, the Congress added an effects test. Up until then, you know, these devices were so transparent that almost anybody looking at them said, well, of course, that's an intent to discriminate against minority voters. Proving that in court was not always easy. And so Congress came back and said, look, you no longer have to prove intent. Intent makes it worse. But even if they didn't intend it, if you can prove the effect of the change, makes it more difficult for minorities to elect candidates of their choice, that's a violation of the Voting Rights Act. Thank you. Tony, tell him to do something. All right. Here, I just want to point out a couple of things, because if you read this without thinking about it, it looks like, for example, take protecting incumbency. It looks like that's designed to protect the council members that appointed you, and it's not. We protect incumbency because people elected them to represent them. And if I pair two council members in a new district, somebody is going to lose their elected representative. And so if you read through those, they're almost all designed to do what the Voting Rights, really all our Voting Rights Act does, and that is protect the ability of voters to elect a candidate of their choice. That doesn't mean blacks electing blacks or Hispanics electing. It means whoever you are getting to elect the candidate in a fair election that gives you a chance. Yeah, Andrea. Oh, well, I thought, you know, you can buy a saddle doing that at an auction.
The only one that gets to do that.
All right. No, go ahead.
Can you explain for us what reverse racial gerrymanders are, please?
I can. Could I go to the next slide? Oh, no, back. Okay. Go back if you. A reverse racial gerrymander. I've talked to you about how the 15th Amendment protects the rights of voters. It protects the rights of all voters, not just minority voters. And so the Supreme Court has told us that if we go through this process and all we do is focus on minority voters and we maximize minority voting strength wherever we can without regard to how it impacts others, a reverse racial gerrymander means that non-minority residents may have a cause of action because and it was Justice O'Connor who wrote this so well. Everybody is entitled to have their vote counted. Everybody is entitled to equal representation. Now, historically, the majority hasn't needed much protection. But we began to find that some states, in their zeal to comply with the Voting Rights Act, Georgia did this, avoided all other aspects or criteria of choosing, and were found to have engaged in a reverse racial gerrymander. So what the Supreme Court has told us is, look, under Section 2, under Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, under the 15th Amendment, race and ethnicity, gender, there are things that are protected that you have to give equal protection to. But race is not limited to minority races or genders or ethnicity. Okay, thank you. Okay, all right.
Thank you, Professor.
Okay, all right. Now, as I told you earlier, I came up with something that doesn't rise to the level of a suggestion. It was just a way to get the city council started discussing or cussing or whatever was going to take place. And so what you'll notice is we're still dealing with 27,961 ideal. If you go over to that far right column, you see now instead of thousands of people, we're 400 low, 2 people low, 1,000 low, 600 high, 650 high. That is, we'll see it on the next map. I think we just made 5 changes to get there. It doesn't have to look like spaghetti when you're done to make this work. And so we will go back to this slide at the end. I want to be able to compare this slide to the first one you saw, and we see them on the same screen. It's a little easier to do it. So you'll see that again, but we instead of a 25% maximum deviation, we got 5.62. Okay. I'm sorry.
Where are you?
Where am I? I'm down in the yellow at the bottom.
Okay.
I don't know if everybody can see that. Okay. And under Board of Estimates, it's 4.68. So it reduces it by about 15, 18% in our circumstances. Are there questions about this slide before we move on? All right. Okay, here are the changes.
That wasn't any sort of a recommendation. That's just what is, right?
Yeah.
That's not reflecting any kind of changes or
Oh,
anything.
no, that was
That's-
reflecting changes.
This one does, but the last one did?
Well, that was the slide. Back
That?
up. Yeah, that is the plan that you're going to see on this next map. Tony.
Okay.
Yeah, it reflects 5 changes. Had to because of the 25% maximum deviation. Okay. So the 5 changes, you can see if you take that top arrow over by the river, that's the river just above that, you've got part of 2 election precincts that have been split to the northeast. Election precinct 1 is the one on the far right. I don't know the number on the one on the left. If you go down to the next arrow, you can see an entire election precinct that was moved from 5 to 4. The next arrow, you go down and see an election precinct move from 3 to 2. Next arrow down, an election precinct moved from 3 to 4. And the next one going down from 5 to 3. And what those did was bring the population differential within balance. We only split 2, I only split 2 election precincts. And you'll see in a little bit, one of those has been reunited, number 1. So it relatively minor changes can balance population. Now, what that doesn't have, as it sits there, is it doesn't have the wisdom of this sitting council applied to lines. And it wasn't designed to do anything other than open a discussion. And I'll show you in a moment. And in doing that discussion, that last arrow that points straight down, I moved some from District 5 to District 3. Jim and Josh have talked about that. You'll see in a map in a month. That gets moved back to 5 because we can leave it in 5 and still make the numbers work, because 5 shedding people to 4 and 3 is shedding people to 4 and 4 is moving some people out to 1. I mean, 4 is kind of a pass through. It's right in the middle, and to use whole election precincts as best as possible, some things sort of move through 4. If you look at the white down there, that's Beverly Hills, and you see 2 little light blue boxes. You'll see them again on the tail end of the slides. Beverly Hills, not in the City of Waco, and City of Waco, because of the stadium and planning, is doing a land swap. I don't know when that will finish, but that little blue area on the top right now is in the City of Waco. The little blue area on the bottom is in Beverly, and we're going to flip them at some point. So that's just a sort of a place saver. So that I remember that we're doing that. Okay. Okay, this is the area, and hopefully you can see it. I won't read it to you. This area is moved from District 3 to District 2 because 2 needed people and 3 needed to shed people. And it's an area that has a sufficient minority population that moving it from 3 to 2 does as little damage as I was able to do. The next slide is detail on the 3 to 4. And we'll come back to that because there's been some further discussion on that you'll see. But Josh and Kelly have reviewed that. And one of the things that they've done is try to keep neighborhoods together with this. And you'll see how that evolves in a couple slides. Okay, next. This is an area that hits 2 election precincts. It goes along the river. It's Herring Avenue, down around School Street, just above North 10th, Colcord to North 6th, back over and around up Washington, back to the river. The part on the far right end, that green down at the bottom, is a part of election precinct 1. And it's my understanding that Kelly and Andrea have talked about putting that back in 4. Anyway, that's what I've been told. Okay. This is the area that I've talked about going from District 5 to District 3. Again, it splits kind of an insular concentration of residents that have a community of interest. Councilmember Holmes really wanted that to stay in 5. Councilmember Borderud thought that would be okay if we could continue to balance population, and it appears that we can. Okay. 5 to 4, again, 5 had to get rid of people. And so this is an area moving 5 to 4. And then at the other end of 4, we're looking at 4 giving something to 1. And as you'll see in a moment, there are a couple of areas that are under discussion. Okay. All right. These are the 2 slides I was talking about. And you can see the difference between 26.14 and 5.62. And all that tells us is that from a 1 person, 1 vote standpoint, this plan's fine. That doesn't mean it's a good plan. It just means we don't have a 1 person, 1 vote. We don't have a malapportionment issue. Okay. These 2 areas, and again, I'll start with the bottom left. See the area marked 5. This is a map of changes that have been agreed to by the council members involved. They haven't been adopted. They're just, for the time being, there seems to be an agreement on these. So the area at the bottom says 5. That little area in red was what I had moved into 3 in that plan. And the 5 simply says they've agreed to put it back in 5. The triangle just to the right of that was an area that I had put into 4. And the area with the 4 up there that's sticking up in was in 3. And what Kelly and Josh have talked about is if you take the area that's the 3 and move it back out of 4, back into 3, it makes sense with the neighborhoods. And the same thing with that little finger with the 4 in it. If since you've pulled off the Castle Heights area, leaving that in 4 made more sense to them. So that's what that shows. So this shows 3 changes that have, based on the discussion, or at least tentatively agreed to by council members involved. Now, remember, it takes 6 votes. Well, it takes 4 votes, but the 2 white areas, the one on the far right, I took from 4 and put in 1 in the sample plan. The one on the left is an area that has about the same population. And the discussion right now, I think it's still, I'm accurate, Andrea can correct me, but I think the discussion that Andrea and Kelly are having right now is how should those be allocated? And I've got a couple slides to show you. So if you go to the next one, if you leave the back ones, I'm sorry. If you leave the white area on the top right, where it was in the sample map, then these, next slide, these are the numbers that are associated with it. It's got a decent maximum deviation. And if you look at the total minority profile and the breakdown of Black and Hispanic origin, you see that they're virtually the same. Some are up about 1.5%, some are down about 1.5%. But when you compare those to the initial plan, or if you go back and compare them to the benchmark, if you will, the existing lines, you can see that the minority profiles have been relatively kept stable. Okay?
Dr. Morrison, just
Yes.
a quick question. So I understand that the numbers that you're looking at for this study is the census, including the annexation in the
Yes.
previous slide. Has there been, or is it even, I guess, part of the responsibility of your role to look at the number of registered voters in the specific sections that are being moved? I'm just curious.
Actually, we, particularly in an election like this, where the voter registration is so greatly at odds with the turnout, I trust the council members who've run those elections to look at that. I look at the voting age population, so you know what the upper limit could be. You know, what's the population of 18 years and older? But no, I don't look at the.
As far as registered.
No, I don't
Gotcha.
look at that. Don't look at political parties.
Yeah, no, I totally understand. Hi, Chris, how are you doing?
All right. Yeah.
I think what I heard out of that exchange is that in your suggestion of how we need to redistrict, you have just looked at voting potential in
Yes.
terms of what the voting
That's
power
right.
is, as opposed to which of the voters are actually actively exercising that right.
Yeah, if you would go to the did vote list, going back past elections and break them down by election precincts, you can do that. But no, I don't.
So Elaine, we might have to get folks registered.
Yeah, that, I just wanted to make sure before we move forward, because I like needed the answer to that question before you moved
yeah.
on.
Yeah, and
Thank
the other question that comes up regularly is, do I pay attention to Democrats and Republicans? And
Yeah,
and the
that
answer is
totally
no.
makes sense. Yeah.
Okay,
Gotcha.
all right. Are there
For
other
me, it does
questions?
anyway.
I really do want you to ask questions as we go along in case you have them. All right. Oh, yeah. Hi, Linda.
I didn't get my paperwork in, so I can't participate, but the answer to the question is for $37.50.
The did vote list.
Will do with that.
Okay. Linda has said that for $37.50, if you'll go to the elections office, they will do the download of that data for you.
Thank you.
They'll even send it to you. It's kind of raw data usually unless you pay them to
Yeah.
analyze it, but
But you can
they'll send
download
it
it.
to your
Yeah,
computer.
you know, at least when I was running, I wasn't worried. I was more concerned about a did vote than anything else. But what they send you, you can download it into an Excel spreadsheet, and then you can manipulate it pretty much any way you want. Okay, 2 slides up, please. One more. Okay, this is if you leave the area in the yellow on the right in 1 where it currently, in 4 where it currently is, but move the area up here, which is Reuter and 15th Street and Lyle Avenue down to 25th Street. If that rectangle, if you flip those, you know, right now, those are both in 4. If you leave the one on the right in 4 and move the one on the left into 1, the numbers are like follows. Well, okay, back up. They were just before that. Back. Those are the numbers of that map. The first numbers you saw were the map, the numbers earlier on in the plan. So yeah, those are the numbers, the map you just saw. I apologize. It's been almost a month since I made this. This is the next to the last slide. I can hear the sighs of relief. What this shows are areas where we have split census blocks and a few areas along the perimeter of the city where we have annexations. Most of the annexations also split census blocks. And the reason that matters is the census is published by enumeration block. And so we know how many people are in the block, and we know what the race and ethnicity of those and the age of those. What we don't know is if you split that block, how many live on one side and how many live on the other. And so to the extent that split census blocks become a part, if both parts aren't in the same district, figure out how many are in each side and what the racial and ethnic breakdown is. And again, that's the sort of thing that certainly I don't do at this stage. I wait till, we've got a plan that people are in agreement on, and I have enough of a cushion on one person, one vote, or malapportionment that there's no way it could put it out. And then we sit down with the city planning people and we just figure out how to allocate the people. I think that's, and then what follows is simply, those are the numbers that allocate, the populations that allocate to those various numbers. And you can see that there are not a lot of people there. There's a total of 620 people in the 7 blocks in the city of Waco that were split by the census. Questions?
You want to go back, maybe go back 2 slides? You want to point out the agreement that?
I did.
Okay.
I did. Again, if you look at where Herring comes down, no, not Herring. Andrea, what is it next to Barron?
It's it would be Waco Drive.
Waco Drive, thank you. Yeah, I see Highway 840. If you go down that direction and see the bright green line, that's Waco Drive. Everything to the right of that was in 4, and it's my understanding that the agreement is it would continue to be in 4. Is that accurate?
I'm in 1.
I know, but
So, Ms. Houston, so I was in the meeting and.
Oh, you heard?
Yeah. And so,
Okay. I'm sorry. I thought maybe you knew. I'm
yeah,
sorry.
yeah.
Sorry.
No, Councilmember Fairfield and Palmer have agreed that that portion that Professor Morrison just pointed out below Waco Drive will be in 4.
And they reached that agreement last night, which is why you don't have a map. I already updated this once with the first slide. I hated to put that on the city staff to have to do it again today. Other questions?
So what you're saying is they've decided on everything on the other side of Waco Drive, but no decision. They haven't reached an agreement
No.
on the other part.
No, on the remainder of 4, that area marked 4, and on the remainder of 1. So right now in the plan, I say right now as if it mattered. In the plan that I showed the city initially, both of those were in 4.
And have been in 4 for
And have been in 4.
decades,
The
always.
So
qu-
even 1 was in 4?
Yes, they were both in 4. The discussion right now between Kelly and Andrea is which of those ought to be in 4 and which of those ought to be in 1. And Jennifer Ritchie has been visiting with them, and it's my understanding that there may still be some ongoing discussion about that. That's one area, for example, where this committee having input could be meaningful to either of those council members. As a committee, you're free with your chair to suggest changes. If I were on the committee and I had 3 or 4 council members already in agreement on some things, I might be inclined to leave those alone unless I saw something that was really wrong with them. But you're not bound by anything that you've seen right now. It may be a better use of time to focus on some of the things that are in question, or if you see something up there that just doesn't make any sense.
What was the justification of, because you said this was kind of agreed upon yesterday, but what can you expand a little bit on?
I think
What
the
was the
discuss-
justification of?
Yeah, I think the discussion of both of them has to do with areas of influence, concentrations. Does it make sense to go across the river? Does it make sense if you're going to cross the river to do it some other place? I mean, going across the river probably is going to have to happen. And so and if you'll look at those stats, they're almost identical. I mean, the populations vary a little bit, but the minority profile, I think, is within 0.5%. I think if you put the area with a 1 in 1, the African-American profile goes up over 1% or so. If you put it in 4, the African-American profile of 1 goes down a little bit. But those are our 2 large minority districts. And so from the standpoint of voter turnout, it may not make a lot of difference. But I think some of the discussion is, well, there may be a cohesiveness within a neighborhood. And I think Tony Herbert probably as a committee member who's represented one of those areas. In fact, I know Tony has an opinion that,
What did he say? What did he said? I know Tony has an opinion.
that I think the committee would find informative.
So if anybody's interested.
And if they're not, other questions?
So I do have a question.
Yeah.
You mentioned, that maybe we should use this little bit of time that we have to go out and
Yeah.
try to ascertain what,
absolutely.
what some opinions are. So do you have any ideas? How is that done? I mean, we're just a committee.
Well,
You mean get with our council person and,
well, no, I mean.
I know, but go out into the community with the council person or at least with their blessing?
I think that's
or-
between you and the council person.
Okay, but there's nothing against it.
No, you're supposed to.
I know we can, but is there anything that says the council shouldn't be involved in
No,
that? Okay.
No, they tell me what to do. I don't tell them
Okay.
what to
Well,
do.
that's what I told them.
But I think in all fairness and to be equitable, that's why I wanted to know what was the significance and their thought yesterday, because like you said, it was like a percentage or less either way.
Yeah.
And so that, I guess for this committee, we want to make sure that there's going to be equity, so, yeah, I guess I have that same question, Tony, as
Well-
far as the committee.
Well, I can give you
What can
some,
we get away with?
Yeah, what-
I can give you
well, to
some.
ensure that, there's fairness. And I think, for me personally, I think I will want to look at, like Ms. Lewis said, the voters, the registered voters and the,
Did vote list.
yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, that's important. And remember too, that if you're 2, 5, and the mayor, that election is going to have 5 times the turnout as 1, 3, and 4. If I got those.
You got no,
Okay, 4, 5, and mayor
it's 2, 4, and 5 at the same
are in the
time.
off year and 1,
And then
3, and
1,
the
3,
mayor.
and the mayor at the same, and 1, 3, and the mayor.
So
will be
when you go to
coming
the
up.
did vote list, everybody's going to vote. And so when you look at when the mayor's up, you're going to have people from all 5 districts voting. And when you're looking at the even years, which is 1, 3, and mayor.
And you will be appalled when you look at the voting numbers.
You will. You will.
And you will be surprised at the variation from one election to the next election in that, because
Yeah.
things happen
Yeah.
and suddenly an election can be really hot.
Yeah.
And then like District 4 had, I think at our lowest point, there's probably 200 people that voted out of, I don't know how many registered voters,
Probably-
but,
probably
25,000
yeah.
people.
Curtis,
But then-
What are the districts for the even year?
the even years, it's going to be 1, 3, and mayor,
Oh,
which one of the effects of that.
Oh, but this year we'll have 2 as well because we don't have a District 2
You
representative.
got to have somebody running.
so
again.
1, 2, 3 and mayor
Yeah.
is going to be this year. But as
Huh.
far as looking at the debt.
Ordinarily, it's 1, 3 mayor, which, for example, I represent District 3 and
But you
run
would
for
be
mayor.
interested in
I couldn't
that.
run for my district again.
Have run in an
If you're in District 5, you can run for mayor from a safe seat. Curtis.
So your charge is to try to balance the 5 districts population wise to be as close as possible.
Well, go ahead. It's
Is
to
it
be,
our responsibility to look ahead at what will keep those populations even?
growing like we have, I actually have done that for a couple of clients. It's never worked out because you got a 10%, you start off at 4 or 5 or 6% deviation. It just, and you end up with 25%. I was in a city last night, it was 75% maximum deviation. City of Lubbock, I've done that twice for them, and both times they said, we're going to the southwest, underpopulate that, and that way maybe we won't have to do it again. Well, they continue to grow the southwest. So in the best of all worlds, Curtis, you could do that, and it might work. One of the issues is when you go to underpopulate, you typically don't do it in the growth area, because the growth area is typically not the minority area. And the reason you underpopulate is so you quit bringing people in and lowering the minority profile as you're trying to get to 0 instead of 4 or 5, 6% of maximum deviation. And those are almost never the fast growing areas in Texas. So that would be the issue. You might end up with a voting rights issue because you could have done better and didn't, and be a Section 2 dilution issue. Why didn't you do better when you could have? And it's, as much as it makes sense and seems intuitive, it's probably unlikely to help you in 10 years' time.
I guess where I'm going with that is there have been recent elections since the last census when one council person gets elected with 100 votes.
Yep.
And another council person gets elected with 3,000 votes.
That's right.
So in essence, the person with 100 votes has the same vote as the person with 3,000 votes.
And if one person, one vote really meant what it sounds like, but everybody, and you know, take District 2. Everybody in District 2 is entitled to representation, whether they voted or not. I mean, what you say from a political science standpoint, I think makes some sense. But if you only divide it up, think about the consequences. If you only divide it up among people who voted, all of a sudden, I think the educated, the wealthier the people would control everything. And so, you know, I'm sorry. Okay. Other questions? These are great questions. Jennifer?
Just to be clear, so I was trying geographically to figure out exactly what we were saying. So in what Andrea and Kelly talked about, 1 stays in 4, and then on the map, the part under Waco Drive goes or stays? Sorry, I just want to make sure I was clear.
Could you back up until I ask you for maps for a minute?
I think they haven't negotiated it all out yet.
Yeah, I know.
No, but I
So,
want
mean, at
there's
this point,
an easier way to show this. Keep
Okay.
going. Stop. No, go back. Now, can you move, Pat? All right. See the 2 areas in white?
Yeah.
Those, except for the area on the one on the right to the
South of 84.
yeah,
kind of,
south
yeah.
of 84.
Yeah,
Those are the 2 areas where there is no agreement.
where there
Uh,
is no agreement.
There is no agreement except in that one area. Right now, if my understanding is correct, Kelly would like for the area on the right to all be in 4
Still.
still, and the area in the left to move to 1. And Andrea is just the opposite.
Okay.
That's my understanding of the discussion that's ongoing. Now, Jennifer's been a part of that discussion. She may not be able to tell you about it. I don't know what the rules were in their discussion.
That's correct. So above 84 and the square to the left, said a different way, are still in play, like no agreement. But below 84, they have agreed that that will be in 4.
But from what Mike said earlier, you accomplish the same thing by putting the little box into 1 as you would by putting part of the riverfront there into 1.
Well, it depends on what you're trying to accomplish.
Well, no,
Tony.
I mean, just population wise.
Yeah.
Population wise, I don't
And-
think it matters.
And
much.
racially, right? The
It,
racial
it appears that they're quite close, absolutely. I'd been asked about what do you do to get comment? Some of the things that have been done in the past, check with your neighborhood associations. Check with people you go to church with. You know, you know people who are active in the neighborhood. Get their opinions. You can talk to your council member. You can talk to former council members.
And so then what do we do with that?
You form an opinion, Tony,
No,
and then you
no,
come
I
back
mean,
as a
then what-
group.
Do we bring it back to this group?
Yes, yes. What the council wants is to hear from this committee as a whole. Now, what your individual council members want is to hear from you individually as well. And I think the council decision has been that any council member is free to ask if you would talk to them. And I think what's been asked is if that was going to happen, that they let the other council member know as a matter of courtesy, but I don't think it's required. And I would encourage you to talk to anybody that wants to talk to you, because you may learn something from them that you wouldn't otherwise know that's important.
Okay, so if we go out and we have conversation and say we get input from a neighborhood association, should we bring it to you to be included in the next packet?
No,
I mean, we don't give it to the whole,
I think everything should go through Jennifer and she'll forward it to me.
okay,
Yeah, so everything will be done kind of at the committee level. So
right,
Professor Morrison's kind of shared with us his original idea. The council has kind of hashed it out over the last few weeks. And then now we have the opportunity to kind
Okay.
of delve further, talk to them, bring that back to the group. So at the end of
So
the day,
you-
once everything is done, we're going to go back to the council with our recommendation. And so we make that based on the information that our committee members bring back to the group.
so you will be assembling an agenda.
Yes.
And so if we have something that we think needs to be shared with the entire group, we should email it to you or give it to you or whatever.
And if there's any additional information you need, whether that be from Professor Morrison, whether it be from the city, remember, if you'll just funnel those to me, then I can get that to the right place and make those requests. And if that's information that, is helpful to the whole group so that we're kind of at least prepared when we meet again, I think, that would be helpful to try to get that out to everyone. So we're seeing the same things. We come back to the meeting, with the similar information
To
that
your
we've reviewed.
knowledge, has there been any presentation, communication with the neighborhood associations, specifically like N4 or Kelly's? What is Kelly's name?
If so, it would have been by your council member, I suspect.
I've heard from,
I'm sorry.
I have heard from the neighborhood association that will be affected by the part that has been proposed to go into District 1 that fronts the river there. In fact, they've written a letter to somebody.
Could that be shared with this committee?
I'm sorry.
Oh.
Yeah, Jennifer, are you able to hear me?
Yeah, we can.
So I know, I've seen the letter from the Brook Oaks Neighborhood Association. And I know in some larger communities, there's surveying and polling to kind of identify community of interest or communities of interest. And I know we don't have the resources to do that, but could we at the very least maybe get maps that define the neighborhood associations to kind of see how the city identifies the various neighborhoods as which ones go together as communities of interest?
Yeah, because I think that would be helpful, especially in light of kind of your comment that, statistically, and as far as making sure that we're adhering, to the changes that we want to make, and we're accomplishing, what I'll just call the numbers part of it, we're accomplishing that. And now it's just a matter of, okay, if there is more logical definition of neighborhoods or associations that makes sense, and for us to be able to understand, if it is a discussion between Kelly and Andrea, that we know, what their thoughts are.
And I don't know. Sorry. I don't know if there's any minutes or notes. I know there's a letter from the previous meetings, but if any of that could be sent to us electronically to review it, at least before the next meeting. Because I don't know when their next meeting is, or if it'll even be before our next meeting, but any additional information like that would be helpful.
Mhm. Is that something that you guys would have, Jennifer, or as far as neighborhood association meeting minutes, or we could?
Yeah, I don't know that we will have the minutes of the neighborhood association meetings. We certainly will have maps of the neighborhood associations. Now, I would point out that Millette Harrison's getting real active again with neighborhood associations. There's some talk about lines changing in different neighborhoods, but we certainly can get you what the current neighborhood association maps are, and she may have some of the minutes. I will ask, and to the extent we have them, I will forward them to you.
That's also a resource you might decide to have come visit with this committee.
Yeah. I wanted to point out, Chairperson Manning, that it was a good suggestion to have everything funneled through you, but I wanted to remind, I know a lot of y'all are on other boards and probably have heard this and know this. So, so I may be telling you something you already know, but we have to be careful to make sure that we're not having a quorum of this committee communicating. So if you send something outside a posted meeting, so if you send something to the chairperson, you know, you don't want to be copying the whole committee or even a quorum of the committee. We want to be real careful about that. And so if y'all will just be cognizant of that, because even an email to a quorum can be an open meetings violation.
So as far as communicating similar information to everyone, once we've kind of commingled that or brought
Yeah.
that together, then upon
Yeah,
determining the agenda, publishing the meeting, then
Yep.
we can provide
Yep.
that information,
Yep.
correct? Okay.
right. The only place for y'all to have a quorum of y'all discuss this issue is in a posted meeting. So, so staff will be accumulating it and you saw the proposed meeting schedule. The next meeting was proposed to be 4 p.m. next Thursday. And so anything that we have that we can get back out to y'all, we will do that before the 28th.
So our challenge is a timeline. I mean, we have very, very little time to do all this.
The goal has been to try to make sure we have the new redistricting done before the next election. And so in order to have that done, you're correct, it's a very tight timeline. And so the goal is to have y'all's report to council as close to Thanksgiving as possible.
This process a month by now. Remember, the census, traditionally and by law, the census was to go to the president by no later than December 31st. It got there April 30th. Traditionally, we had the Texas census by the middle of February. We got it toward the end of August. So the city has to call its election in January, and filing begins in February for a May election. And so if we are to have an election under the new lines in 2022, really, if this committee is not reported back before Thanksgiving, you know, we lose people for Thanksgiving. Then we 2 weeks later, we start losing for Christmas and New Year's. And all of a sudden, the date to call the election has passed before we know what the lines are. Now, Dallas has already determined they're not going to try to get theirs done for a 2022 election. I have some other clients who are not going to do that. And that's really a decision for the council to make. But if the council wants to have these lines available for 2022, that's the kind of schedule we have to keep. And you're absolutely right. It puts us on a treadmill.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got other clients in the same boat, so I'm not always available.
We have 26,000 college students in Waco. Were they counted in the census?
Somewhere, the city actually tried very hard to get them counted because for federal block grant funding, that makes a big difference. I don't know, Curtis, what percentage it was. Jennifer might. But my guess is, one, most of them were counted at home, even though they were here April 1st. And two, maybe 3% of them vote at most. So neither in the count nor in the election. And one of the things that happens is, to the extent a military base or a college where people are here is counted, from a technical standpoint, I always try to put that into a minority district because you have a phantom voter. You can meet your population numbers without bringing in a bunch of voters that may typically be white. But yeah, it's.
So some of these statistics do include some college.
Oh, yes. No, there'll be some college students in there. And I at some point, you know, the census suppresses data below a multiple block level because they don't want people to be able to tell who you are in answering it. But at some point, when we get down at least to the block group level, we'll be able to get some idea of, you know, people who are in college as opposed to working or not working. But it won't be in time for this, Curtis. Yeah. Yes, I'm sorry.
Professor Morrison, am I understanding you to say that although our college students are here physically, that if they were counted in their home city, we would not be able to count them.
Yeah, they won't show up in our numbers if,
So their physical presence is not what triggers it. It's their domicile or residence, whatever they're calling it.
no, the
these days.
physical presence is supposed to trigger it, but like so many things, it doesn't always. You know, college
won't always.
students.
Yeah, I was one. I don't ever remember voting in a local election
Yeah.
in Virginia or Cambridge. I don't know.
No, there will be some that got a census form in Waco and filled it out and were counted in our census. My best guess is most did not do that. But, Dale Fissler might know because he kind of headed our full count
Yeah.
process.
Right. We can try to get that information from Esmeralda, the city secretary, who also worked on that process. I know, like Professor Morrison said, we tried real hard because we wanted to get our numbers up for block grant funding. So we tried real hard, but whether it worked, I don't know.
Well,
We may
and
not
can
be
I,
able-
this is Jana, can I add one thing to that? We've got to remember from a college student perspective, they were in the virtual world. So even though they typically would have been in Waco, a lot of them were in their home states, in their home cities, counties, et cetera. So it was normally it's complicated and it was 20-fold more complicated from that perspective.
Good point.
Thank you, Jen. That's a great point.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean,
But it's interesting, District 1 represents 2 of our colleges.
yeah.
Professor Morrison, I was just wondering, I imagine this is a part of the next meeting, but could we get the new numbers with the new agreed upon? It looks like the 2 areas that are still being disputed seem interchangeable in some ways. And so now that there's a portion that's been agreed on.
You actually have, in what I've given you, numbers where
those
one's
numbers
on
do
one side
reflect-
and the other's in the other. The problem with going beyond that is until they're allocated, my numbers are going to be several thousand short of the census. But you've got those 2 spreadsheets with those 2 maps. And one of them goes to each of the spreadsheets. So you can see, and the minority profile is, the total minority is virtually identical. The part to the upper left has a higher African-American count than the one on the right, but only by a percent and a half. And the one on the right has a higher Hispanic origin resident count than the one on the left. But beyond that, you can hardly turn around for the difference between them. Now, of course, having said that, you look at things like home ownership, how long have they lived there? There are so many factors that go into, are they active or are they not active, that the numbers tell me a lot. But your presence in those areas and your council members are going to be able to put flesh on those bones and be able to say, yeah, the numbers look a lot alike, but this is an area much more politically active than that area. And therefore, it might be a better or it might be a worse, depending on how activity was directed.
Understood. Thank you.
All right. So other comments or discussion?
Jennifer, can I ask a question?
Pat, I have a question.
Pat? Yes, sir?
Professor Morrison, just to clarify, the spreadsheets that we have in the packet, though, will not include the area that was agreed to last night, correct?
They're talking about precinct 1 being in 4.
It does not.
So could you update the map to the area on the right, south of Waco Drive, that those numbers have been allocated to whatever they are subject to the agreement?
Yes, I can. We were waiting today to see if there might be a further agreement. So I just got lazy and decided I'd wait till I knew more before I did that. But I will get that to Jennifer for her to share. And if there's other homework that needs to happen so that next week's meeting is productive, if you'll share that with Jennifer, and then Jennifer can share it with Esmeralda or Jennifer or me, and we'll try to get you the information that would keep this process moving so that there's not much lost time.
I have a question that is similar to Tony's question. What are we as members of this advisory council, permitted to do so that we can get a clear sense of what those in our districts would like to see happen? And Ms. Linda is in my district as well, so she probably will coach me or tutor me. But what are we permitted to do?
Well, other than getting together as a quorum or breaking some law, you're permitted to do whatever you think is helpful.
You can go out and talk to people and talk to your, in the neighborhoods or attend a neighborhood association meeting as long as it's not a quorum, including any of our committee members. Yes, ma'am.
Okay,
Mhm.
Yeah, we
So talk to
really
your
want you to
council
use
people.
your imagination and your connections to
Okay.
learn what you can.
okay.
And your willingness to, to work, to
Yeah.
really,
Yeah,
to get
that
out
too.
there and hustle.
That too.
And a problem that we'll have, I think, is that most of the neighborhood associations meet once a month at most.
Yeah.
If we don't hit it right, you know,
Well, I think though you've got
Zoom
officers.
I mean,
and-
they might call a meeting or, they might have a board meeting.
They might, but you've also got officers and past officers in neighborhood associations, many of whom will have a reasonable feel for
Yeah.
some things. And
We were
that's
just-
going to vary by the neighborhood association.
Mhm.
Some are very active and fairly tight knit, and some are almost defunct.
Right.
You know,
So
there,
From what I understand, there was a presentation, correct? No, there hasn't been any discussion at any of the other, at the neighborhood association.
not,
like for
there may have been by
District 4.
council members, but the only presentation, I work for the council. The only presentations I've given until today have been to the council in a council meeting.
So by a council member, has there been a
I don't know.
presentation or discussion at?
I'd be surprised if there hasn't, but I don't know the answer.
Gotcha. So my question, going back to my question, if there has been, if there's any notes or minutes, which I would think would be open record, like public concern, is it okay for us to see or review those if there is one?
I'm going to leave that to Jennifer R.
Yeah, so the neighborhood meetings actually aren't subject to open meetings. So, so to the extent that Millette, who's on city staff, may have those minutes, I will certainly be glad to get those to you. If she doesn't have those minutes, she might be able to reach out and ask. She's got an email list. She might be able to reach out and ask those neighborhood boards if they have had meetings about redistricting and to provide those minutes. So certainly we'll do our best to get you those.
I seriously doubt that there's been much discussion at the neighborhood level of this process.
Yeah.
Just
There hasn't been
because
hadn't been
it's
time.
just starting,
Hadn't been
I mean,
Yeah, true. But we only have a week, that's
And we
sometimes.
Like trying to accumulate as much as you can.
Yes, I mean.
Yeah. Well,
and there aren't too many neighborhoods that it's going to really affect very much.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah,
So
we-
it may just be best, even if we start with, I mean, if you haven't already, speaking with your city council, representative, just to maybe start there, because probably they would have, I would think, have prompted maybe any detailed discussion that was done at the neighborhood
Yeah,
association level.
And we started with 5 changes. We eliminated one of those 5 changes and added one. So we still have 5 changes.
Yeah.
And if you're not in one of those areas, they probably don't feel like they have a dog in the fight.
Right.
One, Elaine, I can say that I do attend some neighborhood association meetings as a part of my role at Grassroots. And this has not been discussed formally through any of the neighborhood associations I've attended. Now, that doesn't mean I've not heard from some residents, because I have. And I am more than happy to share some of that next week when we meet about some of their feedback that I've received.
Okay, good.
But that has not been discussed.
I'm very active in District 2 neighborhood associations, and we meet maybe 3 or 4 times a year. We don't even meet every month. Right.
So there's
Yeah.
some-
One thing I might suggest, and I thank you for that idea, is if you have information that you would like the committee to be aware of, if you'll pass that along to Jennifer and she can pass it along to city staff, maybe we can get that out to you before, maybe they can get that out to you before the next meeting. If somebody has a good idea, it'd be nice if when you came into the meeting next time, you had some additional information rather than being hit with it in the meeting.
And I think probably it's going to come down to those types of discussions because, I think in general, we understand the statistical piece of it and we're meeting our requirements there. So then it becomes, the other issues that you find by talking with the citizens. So I think that that will kind of frame the discussion, I think, for this next meeting.
But Jennifer, just to clarify, we do not send out group emails among this group.
No, no, sir. And in fact, even the chair.
Text messages.
No, right. Any kind of, yes, thank you. Any kind of communication. So individuals of y'all would send information to the chair, and then she can't even email all of y'all. So she's just going to be the point of contact to Professor Morrison or staff. And if whatever information she gets is appropriate to send out to y'all as a group, we will do that before the next meeting.
I would say that one possible difference from that is talking to the other person in your district.
Oh, yeah.
You're the team.
Yeah.
Yes, no, she is. So Mrs. Lewis is just, we didn't have quite all of her paperwork and everything completed. So we've just asked that she sit there as far as not being with the committee, but she will be going forward. So,
Okay.
yeah. So. Let's see, I was gonna ask another thing. Oh, I do know. So, as far as continuing discussions by council members, and I don't know if you can answer this or not, Jennifer, but with respect to Andrea and Kelly, are they continuing discussions, or, okay, this is what they've agreed upon, and now let's hear back from the committee? Do you know kind of where they are in that process?
I don't.
Okay.
I know that they're open to discussions, but I don't know that those are continuing. I think they really are, I think all council members, but they especially are very interested in the work of this committee.
Okay. All right. Other questions? Yes, I'll make sure you have that. Is that easiest, just to have you send my contact information?
I will. I'll be glad to
Okay.
do that.
Perfect. Yes, Tony?
I'm just, I'm so impressed that everybody seems so interested in the process and, really getting into it and understanding the implications, because, this is going to be people's voting power for 10 years. This is an intensely political process. So it's not one of those things where you want to keep politics out of it. This is by definition, the most political thing probably that gets done aside from elections. So.
I mean, it's one of the few times when citizens really, and again, it's like I said earlier, how much closer you are to your local government than to the state or the national. For the most part, the people in Austin, the people in Washington, they don't really care what the folks sitting around this table think. Your council members do. And so Tony's absolutely right. And you've got an opportunity that pretty important. And I see you're taking it seriously. I'll join Tony with saying thank you for volunteering to do this. You're getting paid just what Tony and I got paid when we were on the council.
Professor Morrison, can I add one comment to what Tony said? This is Jana Hickson. About the 10, this will affect things for 10 years, but I also want to encourage the committee to think beyond the specific council members that are currently elected, because that could change. So this is about the locations and the people representing the residents and the voters representing those votes too. So just something to keep in mind.
Yeah, I mean, they've turned Tony and me out.
Thank you.
All right, so just a few housekeeping items before we leave. As we mentioned, the proposed schedule is to have our 4 o'clock meeting next Thursday as well, October 28th, 2021. So it'll be our second meeting, and I guess you guys have all seen the slides. So, I mean, we're okay with that for now? Okay, perfect. So we'll start there. And as you said, just go ahead and send all your requests or information to me, and we will disseminate that to the group. So we're all clear there. All right, and so just quick housekeeping. So for this and future meetings, a quorum of the Citizens Redistricting Advisory Committee must meet in person, and a limited number of members may attend remotely pursuant to the Texas Open Meetings Act. So if you do need to attend virtually, if you'll just let me know as soon as possible, because we do have to have 7 members here. I believe it's 7, right, Jen?
You'd have to have, yes, 7, you're
7,
right.
7 here live, and then the remainder virtually. So that can make a difference when we're trying to reach the quorum. So if you'll just let me know that as soon as possible, that would be helpful.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
I will unless you prefer I'm not, I plan to attend the next meeting, but unless you give me homework to report, I will just be here as a resource. I don't plan to make a presentation.
Yeah. I think the only thing we were asking maybe of you is just to make the update to that one schedule with the agreed
I figured there
upon.
may be more homework before we're done.
Yeah.
But I will get that.
That's your one thing for now.
And
Okay.
Mike, if there are agreements that happen throughout the week that would reflect, that we would need to reflect, if we can make those as well prior to, that would be great.
The only caveat on that is we have to get council members' agreement to,
Share.
but absolutely.
And we will try to get all of the requested information to you ahead of the 28th, to the extent we have it in time to do so.
One other thing about this process and about the elections that this will affect is that we always said on the council that the only reason that we could get a lot of things done, we could work through just about anything, is because on council elections, local elections, nobody has a D or an R after their name on the ballot.
Yep.
And so as a nonpartisan process, it's so much easier. So much easier and so much more effective.
All right. Any further business or comments? All right. So if there is none, then we will adjourn the meeting at 5:29 p.m. All right. Thank you all very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.